Hello and welcome to Farmland. Later on this programme we'll be focusing on the recommendations outlined in the recent Food Vision Dairy Group final report, which has been given to the Minister for Agriculture, Charlie McConalogue. Director of Dairy Industry Ireland, Conor Mulvihill, will outline what he feels is the positive response from processors to some of the recommendations of the report. And Agriland journalist Megan O'Brien will outline some concerns which have been expressed by farming organisations. But first, I'm joined by Crime Prevention Executive with the Irish Farmers Association, Barry Carey. As the evenings become longer and more wintry, concerns rise in rural areas about the potential for crime or theft. And Barry is here to provide us with some information which may help you avoid any unwanted visitors onto your property over the coming months. Barry, thanks for joining us today. First of all, let's talk about the time of year, Barry. We're heading into the wintry nights and obviously the evenings are getting longer, the clocks went back and people are getting concerned in rural areas about rural crime and the potential for it to grow this time of year. So far you get around the country quite a bit now, you visit many different counties on an ongoing basis. What are you getting from the ground in terms of, do you feel that there is an increase in rural crime or is it something that's just always there, it's kind of consistent?
Yes, Stella, it's always consistent and it's always there. And again, as you mentioned, the clock's going back at this time of year. People always have a concern, and I think recent media reports in relation to high-profile incidents in relation to rural crime has made people even more aware. And as I said, this is an ongoing issues.
And what is the most prevalent form of crime, particularly in rural areas, would you say?
Well, and Garda Síochána will tell you that it's burglaries, and it probably is at this time of year. Despite all the campaigns that we run, light up, lock up, and in relation to opportunistic thieves and that. But there are what we call farm invasions as such in relation to hunting, illegal hunting, groups of gangs going on across farms this time of year, in lamb, in calf, and disturbing, causing criminal damage to gates and fences and properties and that. And then of course, when approached and asked to leave lands by farm owners and landowners, there's an element of bravado and kind of intimidation.
And are they just taking it upon themselves to go illegally onto land that is not theirs, and just because it seems to be an optimal location for them?
Flat lands and lands that are that have hares in them and other items for hunting. This is not a legitimate sport, and it causes huge elements, causes huge problems for the landowners then, because if you have segregated cattle, different cattle in feeding areas, and it has happened in the past, and particularly animal worrying, animal welfare. These are huge issues and it affects the livelihood of the farmer.
What can a landowner do then if they see this, witness it, or if they hear of it?
Well, reporting of crime and reporting of incidents, no better than anybody else, communities are great at seeing something that's not right within their communities. And driving the message home, which IFA and the Crime Prevention Office has with Garda Síochána, promoting rapid reporting of a crime to 999 112, not your local Garda station. Local Garda stations may be temporarily closed, may not have support manpower in it, and therefore the 999 112 goes into a reporting system. Everyone thinks, oh, 999, it's an emergency. It's a reporting mechanism. And once you get it into the system, then the Garda control people can dispatch a vehicle and Gardaí to a particular area.
What other crime then, apart from obviously the illegal hunting, as you said there, you mentioned burglaries and theft. Now, I know from our own experience here in Agriland, we regularly cover the theft of machinery, tools and so on, and even things like fertiliser from farmyards. Yeah. Is that the most predominant thing, and when is the most opportunistic time for them to do this?
Darkness, of course. You mentioned tools, equipment and farm machinery. However, the top three are quad bikes, trailers, right, and tractors. They have been predominantly the top. But opportunistic thieves get in when keys are left in trailers or in tractors and quad bikes, and of course the trailers are left for use, and they're easily hitched up. And in some cases there have been a case where a vehicle was stolen, took the trailer, and then it was found with stolen items in it. But again, what can people do? This time of year, the Garda Síochána and ourselves are constantly at Lock Up the Light Up campaign. No thief or would-bes want to be caught in light, right? Even though they may have hoods or have scarves or balaclavas on them, if they're found and if the system is right, good CCTV system in specific areas, and particularly for those outlying areas, you get a notification. And notifications say to you, even if you can't see the people, you can see them but you can't identify them, notifying Garda Síochána that there are intruders on the premises. And in relation to the other type of crimes, they're opportunistic. They drive in, bogus traders and callers, and particularly for our elderly members of the communities and that who would be the targeted for these things. Younger members don't seem to tolerate it, or just tell people, no, I'm not interested. But engaging with older people, forcing work upon them, and then charging exorbitant fees for it and bringing people away to collect, that has been a trend. And what we've been in the communities, what we have been saying is look out for our elderlies, and then we have a notification, be wary of bogus traders and callers, and what to do if they come. Don't engage with them, and have a speed dial on the phone, or a member of the local community or a neighbour or a family member to contact to say, look, are you around, come over, or I need some support. And in those things it gives peace of mind to elderly rural dwellers.
Certainly it's important that they have that support there, because I'm sure there are elderly people, who are targeted and maybe feel a little vulnerable, and, are smart enough to know that these lads are probably not, on the up and up, but maybe feel a little bit they're on their own, they're elderly. Okay, I know you're looking a bit dodgy here, but I'm a bit too frightened. There's 4 of you in a van here now, right, if you want to clean my gutters. So I suppose having that support, either a link to a family member or a neighbour, someone who can come and give them that support, then they might feel a little bit more confident saying, no, you're all right, keep going, thanks.
And even Stella, from opening the door and engaging in conversation, no thanks, I'm not interested. And those particular messages going out clearly to people who are offering these specific services. And it is, bogus traders and callers that are predominantly opportunistic. If they do engage, you might find another member of the gang are scouting, and if they see something, it's gone. It's in the back of a van. And then we have promoted to counter this, it was launched at ploughing by Minister McEntee, was property marking, right, and the whole value of property marking. And in fact, IFA has been promoting this for a number of years with its members in relation to if you have it marked, the chances of getting it recovered, if it is stolen. Property marking, as I mentioned to you before, 3 things. 1, it acts as a great deterrent. If you're in a community scheme, the signage that's up in relation to property marking, the items that are marked, would-be thieves don't want anything that have marks that they can't get rid of quite easily. And then for anyone buying second-hand pieces, to look out for and watch for anything that's etched on different numbers, and specifically air codes. Air codes denote a specific property in a specific place.
Of course, we must explain to people who maybe weren't familiar, even though we have mentioned it before, with the property marking. That essentially means if you have a generator, a trailer, whatever it may be, you sort of engrave, like for example, your air code or something that's identifiable to you, that's not easy, it's not magic marker, it doesn't wipe off easily, something that is engraved into the piece of equipment or machinery. Thus, if it's found by the Gardaí later or found elsewhere, you can identify it as yours.
Yeah, about 5 years ago, Cavan Monaghan Garda District did it with the Cavan County Council, and it's a property marking machine. It's a very specialist engraving piece of machinery. It was taken on by the County Council, and it was offered out to the various communities. And in a GAA club on a Saturday, in a town community hall on a Saturday, bring in your pieces and we'll have it marked to you, whether it's household items or agri items or farm items. And then other local councils bought them pieces of machinery, and they offered these particular machines in training community get trained in it, they get the machine from the council for a week or so, or 2 weeks, and all of the items are marked. And then the signage goes up to kind of a council and a property marking guard, a sign that says this area is property marked. And that sends out a very clear message to would-be thieves. But what it does then, if you're unfortunate enough to be a victim, the chances of getting your property back are great. And if people are caught with it on them, then this item is reported stolen and it has a specific location for return. In the past and at present, Garda warehouses, property warehouses are there full of items, and they have a property recovery day in which it's offered out, it's advertised, and people come, no receipts, no serial numbers, and unfortunately 99% of people don't get their property back, even though it may look like yours. If you don't have the receipt for it, if you can't verify that it's yours. So property marking plays a huge role in the combating rural crime and combating theft.
Barry, in terms of the rural crime and the incidence of it, whether they have been increasing in recent years or there's just a consistent level there, the Gardaí are obviously engaging with the likes of the IFA to ensure that people are more alert. Of course, there's the community text alert. A lot of things are being done in recent years to try and promote awareness and vigilance around local communities and local areas. But crime is still continuing. It most probably always will. And is it a case of that you're finding in your chats with people on the ground that a lot of this is opportunistic? Or do you think in Ireland there's more of a veering towards organised crime where these, big centres, be it Dublin, Limerick, Belfast, have gangs that they're sending out to these rural areas and watching, areas? Or do you think it is just still someone chancing because they see a generator in the back of a yard?
If gangs leave specific urban areas and travel 100 kilometres, then it's not just opportunistic. What they find may be opportunistic, but if they're planning and they're going to specific areas and seeing what's the weakest area, the weakest element, there were in the past containers found with a lot of items, from boat engines to agricultural equipment to power tools, all of those things destined for European locations, and they were caught at various ports in the past, which kind of showed that it was organised. But having said that, there's a combination of both, and that it is organised in certain places, and then it is the opportunistic, the guy who rambles in, maybe to offer a service, sees something there, puts it in the van. And try to mitigate against that is keeping people aware, and that's what IFA is doing with its members all of the time, trying to keep that. We know everyone's busy. We know all of the challenges in relation to farming, and farmers are very smart people to adapt to new practices, and trying to keep that particular piece just in the back, that light up, lock up, the schemes that we have with some of our member organisations, in that offering specific services, and that looking at best technology, best practices, and what's available for our members. So we say this is a good practice. Tracking devices. Schemes that we have with the likes of Phone Watch, offering our members specific good deals, CCTV systems that are proactive, that you don't just go and you find, oh, there's my shed being broken into, that you get a text alert, that you get a notification on your smartphone to say this is happening now, 999-112, and getting that message out there all of the time. Looking at we dovetail within Garda Síochána what they're doing in relation to during the summertime anti-burglary campaigns, the light up and lock up campaigns, the bugs and traders. We're constantly rolling those messages out. We've conducted webinars very recently through our farm families. We put that particular piece out. We attend JPC meetings. We let our membership know, and we have it out online most of the time. And then we have a DL that goes out to the membership all of the time, letting them know, giving them crime prevention tips and advice. And we've recently done a recording with Garda Síochána. Again, same principle. Light up, lock up, this time of year, what can we do?
And finally, I'll just ask you to give a piece of advice to those watching, be it younger and they've just bought a lot of new machinery maybe this summer, or the older, more vulnerable members of communities, farm families in rural areas, who now are a little bit worried because they're watching the news and they're hearing that crime is about, and they are concerned, and they're now looking into the barrel of November, December, January, dark evenings, little bit frightened. Barry, what advice would you give?
Ireland is still a great place to live and work in. However, as I said a few minutes ago, the farming and rural communities are great at adopting, you have to be conscious and cautious all of the time. As I mentioned, lighting up, locking up, having someone that you can rely on, that you can relate to, that you can phone and say, listen, there's people in my yard, there's people out at my premises. The same thing with farmers who come across people illegally on their lands. You know, the approach mechanism of saying, please leave, this is a working farm, there are animal welfare issues at stake, and not engaging then with the answers that, you know, you're probably going to get, recording the details, taking photographs if it's safe enough to do so, you know, dialing 999-112, getting it into the system, and saying that I'm fearful, I'm being cautious. Again, we mentioned the lighting, the lockups, the cameras, those specific things, and being able to rely on somebody locally. Again, just to say, I have unwanted visitors here, I've told them I'm not interested, and can you come over and visit us? But again, looking out for our elderly neighbours and members in our communities, not just our farming communities, in our rural communities, to keep safe.
Great advice there, Barry Carey, Crime Prevention Executive with the IFA. Thank you very much for joining us on Farmland.
Thank you, Stella.
We're joined now in Farmland Studios here with the Director of Dairy Industry Ireland, Conor Mulvihill, and Agriland journalist Megan O'Brien. Thanks for joining us in studio today. We're discussing the Food Vision Dairy Group final report, Conor, which has been submitted to the Minister for Agriculture, Charlie McConalogue. Now, just to give some context, the Food Vision Dairy Group was set up with a view to reducing emissions within the dairy sector of agriculture. All sectors, of course, are doing it, and this was, I suppose, the auspices of setting up this particular group. They were to come up with a final report with ways or recommendations to reduce emissions within the dairy sector. Now, that report has gone to the Minister, so it'll be up to him to decipher what will be done. But I know that DII has come out already and welcomed the report and said that it will potentially make us and the dairy sector in Ireland more competitive. Can you explain this, Conor?
Okay, so look, dairy is Ireland's one of the biggest emitters, so agriculture is coming up to about 40% of our national emissions in Ireland, and due to current calculations. And dairy, because of our expansion over the last decade in the post-quota era, we're about half of agri emissions. So it could be said that the dairy industry is about 20% of the national emissions of the country. So it's in our interest from a DII perspective to get a grip on this. We know what's coming down. We're seeing in other states like the Netherlands, New Zealand, Denmark, other advanced dairy economies, to say that if a sector does not come to an agreement with the state, things are implemented down on top of the industry and the farmers. So from our point of view, we welcome the innovation that the Minister displayed in terms of getting this group together. And yes, it was a difficult 9 months of conversations with a whole load of stakeholders, and huge positive things were agreed. Like, as you probably see from other stakeholders, there's only maybe 1 or 2 recommendations out of 19 that are outstanding here, and all those concerns are genuinely held. But the goal for us is to be the first sector of the economy to have a deal with the government, including the state agencies, including the EPA and the regulators, and also be the first dairy sector on the planet to have an agreement with their government and the regulators in terms of a roadmap going forward. So we just felt the prize, not just for us as industry, but for the farm families that we rely on that supply us, and the young farmers that want to get in, was absolutely enormous. And yes, there's still issues that need to be worked through, but we haven't lost it yet.
No, I suppose the point of everybody getting involved was that all stakeholders, as you mentioned, wanted to get on board with reducing emissions. Everybody does want to play their part, and that's certainly to be commended, and the fact that they engaged and came up with solutions. From the farmers and the farm family point of view, there is a lot of concern about the exit scheme or reduction scheme, whatever you want to call it, recommended in that report, in the sense that it's going to have a financial cost. It will have, there could be issues there with generational renewal, that perhaps maybe the farm organisations would not agree with the processors on that, because the processors wouldn't necessarily be directly affected by something like that and those recommendations.
Well, I disagree with you there, Stella. The processors go nowhere into the future without generation renewal. We go nowhere without milk supply. So it's a balance around retaining the enormous growth that we have. We're just under 9 billion litres now in 2022, coming up from 5.3 billion litres in 2015-16. So there's been enormous growth, and that has an environmental footprint. Let's call a spade here. You have to say it's had an environmental footprint. And now there's legislation in terms of the Climate Act in place regarding our emissions reductions for all sectors of the economy, not just dairy. And agriculture, in my view, has secured the best deal possible in terms of the 25% reduction in the government's announcement there at the end of the summer. So if you look at what agriculture secured, which is a 25% reduction to 2030 versus energy, which is 80%, yes, it's hugely difficult, but in the cold light of day in a couple of years' time, we'll be seen to have negotiated a good deal with obvious scientific reasons behind that, and we made our case with the farm organisations to government around that. So for us to get to that goal and to be in a sector of the economy, and the Taoiseach said it himself in the recent Food Vision conference, that agriculture is the only sector of the economy taking their legal and environmental reduction obligations seriously. So I think the prize is really there. That's not to say that the farm organisations should not have concerns regarding nitrogen reduction, generation renewal. They're kind of outside the factory gate, but these are negotiated. Like, it could have been a situation where a mandatory cow cull was coming in, that the quotas could return. They were all on the table initially. So to get to a situation regarding a state-funded voluntary process for people who wanted to leave the industry was the recommendation. Yes, it's difficult, but I think it's a great deal for Irish dairy to have. And let's call a spade a spade. Some farmers do want to get out. And if they get some money, that gives some space for new generations to come in our view.
Megan O'Brien, you've followed the Food Vision Dairy Group's work over the last number of months, in particular in recent weeks, particularly in relation to the final report. Conor has outlined some of the benefits and the potential that's there in a positive way for the dairy industry in Ireland. What have you been getting from the farm organisations in relation to the work of the Food Vision Dairy Group, or indeed the final report?
Yeah, look, I suppose it is important to note that it was submitted to the Minister of Agriculture on that day with a note saying that it wasn't unanimously agreed on by all stakeholders. And then I suppose to look deeper into the actual text of the report, it does explicitly state that MOCRA in particular rejected the report. So they are particularly concerned about that piece on generation renewal and the exit scheme, reduction scheme, whatever you'll call it. I suppose it does stipulate in that there cannot be breeding ruminants on it. Now, I know you won't lose your farm, you won't have to give up your land, you can keep it and use it for other purposes, and you can diversify, but they are particularly concerned that the lack of breeding ruminants equates to land sterilisation. So that is a particular concern from them. And John Keane, the president, he said it's an attack on rural Ireland and that he just won't stand for it, and his members won't either. So
I just hasten to add, we had hoped to have John here, and he had, in fairness, come to the episode willingly. Unfortunately, just to unforeseen circumstances, he couldn't make it today. But he did want to express that they do have concerns. I mean, MOCRA and young farmers, and particularly young farmers as well, I think, are really on board with new innovations and technologies and methodologies to reduce, their environmental footprint in a way that perhaps the previous generation was not, or maybe not that they weren't willing, but maybe not as au fait with what was available nowadays. So I do think young farmers are certainly looking for ways to make their own enterprises more efficient while also reducing their carbon footprint. But there is that concern there about the generation renewal. If farmers start leaving, what opportunities will be there for the next generation that come on? Is there a viable future in dairy for them?
Yeah, I think that's really what they're thinking is at this point. They know that the young people in the industry or looking to get into the industry are open to the new technologies, the new sciences and things like that. But I think they feel at this point that this is just maybe too much too soon. And look, the family farm, sustaining that, I suppose, it's part of Ireland's brand in our dairy, in our meat, in everything we do. It's produced locally, sustainably, and they are concerned that the viability of that could be hindered if there is no pathway into these sectors. And I suppose John did say to me, he said to me, look, it's not just dairy, it's all sectors here that we want to encourage young farmers to move into. And things like this scheme, could cut that off, and that's their concern. So they definitely are quite on a hard line with their rejection of this particular recommendation in the scheme, for sure, yeah.
And what about the Crimean Milk Suppliers Association, Megan? They also have concerns.
Yeah, the ICMSA is definitely kind of pushing back as well, and I'm sure you've heard that, Conor. You were there firsthand and saw that yourself. They're definitely concerned with the money, and look, all the farm organisations are saying that, and credit where credit's due. I know Dairy Industry Ireland said it as well, show us the money, where's the funding, and how will this be funded? So it's particularly the Irish Farmers Association, the IFA, they've said they want a full economic impact assessment of this, of all the actions in it. And I know there was some figures outlined in the report, but I suppose we've yet to hear back on where things will be funded from.
Well, Conor, will the appetite be there to fund such a scheme, like an exit scheme?
The first thing is we weren't negotiating with the Department of Finance and the Department of Public Expenditure where the money would ultimately come from. So that's the first thing we'd say. That grouping wasn't there. Even DAFM in the room, who formed the Secretariat, they cannot do that. So there were some limited, I would agree with them, there were some limited economic assessments, and you'd be aware that DIO has done many economic assessments through the impact of the climate bill and even COVID. Like, we believe in that, so we've shared interest in them. But the purpose of this group is to put recommendations. It wasn't a tablet coming down from the mount that nothing can be changed, because new technologies are coming in all the time. It was some principles that we as industry, the farm organisations, the government and the state agencies, including those state agencies that have responsibility over legally binding emissions reductions coming forward, were going to come together. So the opportunity, in our view, from an industry perspective, and I realise it's fine for someone from DII in their ivory tower inside their factory gate to kind of say that, and I'm not saying for one moment, Joe, there isn't concerns over nitrogen reduction or generation renewal, but I can assure you we're lockstep with the farmers. We just think the opportunity is certainly there, and if it was a unanimous document, in our view, it would enhance the Minister's hand in terms of going both not just to the Department of Finance and deeper for the money that is required, but also to Cabinet in general, to get the Greens on board, to get the other political parties. And the prize, as I keep saying, was we were going to be the first dairy industry on the planet to have a deal with government, and the first sector of the Irish economy. I work in IBEC, as some of you know, DII is part of IBEC. We're light years ahead of any other sector, pharmacy, telecoms, in terms of where we are in line with what the Taoiseach himself has said. So the opportunity is there. So I would plead with the likes of John and ICMSA and IFA, and I think they're up for it, to continue the conversation to get this over the line over the next while. And I actually share some of their views. Yes, we have to see the colour of the money, but that's maybe not. This was a report. This got us to that negotiation stage.
You're very positive there about it being such a remarkable achievement for the dairy sector to enter into this agreement, to be perhaps the first to, conclude their report and maybe get some sort of negotiations on a political level going. And do you think that's widely known? Do you think that we are so far ahead? Because you've mentioned there we're further ahead than other sectors, and yet agriculture seems to be the one that's beaten the most with the brush, wrapped across the knuckles all the time, and yet we seem to be powering ahead from what you're saying, obviously as a stakeholder within that group, that we're powering ahead and trying to change things far ahead other sectors.
Yeah, you're kind of proving my point. The opportunity is there. This is in legislation, not just in Irish legislation, it's in European Green Deal legislation as well. This train is coming anyway. And if we look at peer dairy economies across Europe, like Denmark, like the Netherlands, and like further afield, like New Zealand, where things are imposed on them. We had the pleasure of meeting the CEO and chair of Fonterra in the past couple of weeks. And that was the advice that they gave us. Control your destiny yourselves. Don't have it imposed on yourselves as an industry like we had down in New Zealand. So I suppose we're listening to that and listening to the stakeholders, and all is not lost, certainly. And as said in everyone's statement coming out, they're all willing to keep working on this. But the prize is still there for us to be the first ones to do it. And that doesn't mean things haven't changed. We're seeing a lot of new technologies that we thought would be later on the decade, like methane inhibitors, that would have radical implications for that 25%. So there's a lot of positive stuff going. And from a DII perspective, we've nearly a motto: we're paranoid about the present, but positive about the future for our industry and those young farmers who want to come in. And if I look around, and we're exposed to it internationally in terms of other dairy sectors, Ireland is in the best position from an environmental credential perspective, an economic credential perspective, a societal and a generation renewal. You just have to look at the Teagasc figures coming out of what is being made by dairy farmers, what is being made by the dairy industry. It's the jewel in the crown of Irish agriculture, and I would argue, from my vantage point, the overall Irish economy.
Fantastic. Well, Conor Mulvihill from DII, thank you very much, and Megan O'Brien, Agriland journalist, thank you for joining us. We're running out of time, I'm afraid, but we'll be staying tuned, Megan. I know you'll be following the story in the next few weeks as well, going forward, to see where the report goes from here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
That's all from Farmland. Thanks for watching. Remember to follow agriland.ie for all the latest agricultural news, and also be sure to follow us on social media at the following links.